So this session is a panel discussion that we have, and I'll go ahead and begin by introducing our guests. First, we'll have Jessica Corman. She's an assistant professor, and I don't know if this is the right word, limnologist?
Limnology, yeah.
Wow, that's cool. An aquatic ecologist at UNL's School of Natural Resources, where she studies nature through the lens of chemistry. Jessica combines techniques from biochemistry and ecosystem ecology to understand processes that influence elemental flows into a thorough ecosystem, particularly vulnerable to nutrient pollution, lakes and streams. She received her PhD in biology from Arizona State University and her Bachelor's of Science from Cornell. Xin Chao is an assistant professor and a water and irrigation management specialist at UNL's Panhandle Research and Extension Center, a position he began in 2017. His research focuses on irrigation management strategies for crops that are irrigated with center pivot furrow or subsurface irrigation systems. His research aims to provide tools to help farmers and stakeholders maximize crop water productivity and reduce potential environmental impacts. Xin received his BS from South China University of Technology and his MS and PhD from Clemson. Bajesh Marjan is an assistant professor and soil nutrient management specialist at UNL's Panhandle Research and Extension Center. His research areas include soil health, nutrient management, water quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and precision agriculture. Bajesh received his PhD from the University of Minnesota in 2016 in environmental engineering from the University of North Dakota and a BS in food production from Moscow State University. Deepak Santra is an associate professor and alternative crops breeding specialist at UNL's Panhandle Research and Extension Center. The main goals of his research program are to develop cultivar and germplasm for existing alternative crops and to develop new crops for the semi-arid high plains. Crops with major emphasis are proso millet, peas, fenugreek, winter canola, sunflower, and camelina. Deepak received his PhD from the University of Pune in India and Washington State University. And our final panelist is Carlos Urrea. Carlos is an associate professor and dry edible bean breeding specialist here at the Panhandle Research and Extension Center. Some of his research and extension interests include breeding of dry bean varieties to resist rust, white mold, common bacteria blight, and root rots, as well as for water efficiency, minimum tillage, and upright architecture, allowing direct harvesting. Carlos received his PhD from North Dakota State University and a Master's of Science from the University of Puerto Rico and a Bachelor's of Science from the National University of Columbia. So help me in welcoming all of our panelists. So here at the Panhandle Center, and I think we have to blame Gary Stone for this, we lovingly call these panel introductions 5x5s. Each of our panelists will have 5 slides and 5 minutes to introduce themselves to you and discuss their current research efforts in the region. And I will tell you that we already have a cheater on our panel, and I'm going to give him a hard time about it. So my name is Jessica Grosskopf. I'll be moderating the panel, and for this panel, I'll be gathering your questions via text message. So at the end of each presentation, you will see a phone number. I'll put it up now if you want to, where you can text questions to, and I will organize your questions so that we can ask those at the end of the session. And we have until 4:05 p.m. to do this. So again, 5 slides, 5 minutes, and text in your questions. So Jessica Corman, will you please start?
Hi everyone. Thanks for the invitation today, and it's kind of crazy, right? Because it's 2:45 and I'm the first woman here talking. And so what Jessica doesn't know is that they actually gave me an hour today to make up for that. I'm kidding. I'll stick to the 5x5. So I'm going to talk about one of my projects, StringNet. It's in collaboration with the North Platte Energy, and it's funded through the Nebraska Environmental Trust. And I want to give a shout out to one of my master's students, Alani, who has a poster today. So it's going to be a quick talk about it. Definitely check out her poster if you haven't had a chance to yet, because she'll be able to give you a ton more details. The work is in collaboration with Steve Thomas and Chris Chijinski, also at the School of Natural Resources. And so today we've heard a lot about water and water quantity. And there's an undeniable fact about water that I want everyone to keep in mind when they talk about water, and that water is rarely just water. Right? There's a reason that after you cook a messy meal, you put your pots and pans in the sink, pour water in there, and let them soak before you try to clean them up. Right? Because water is really, really good at dissolving stuff, and that means it's really, really good at moving stuff across the landscape. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. And as John mentioned earlier today, when we know what that water has in it, right? When you know how much nitrogen is in that water in the form of nitrate, and you're using that water to irrigate your crops, you can use that much less nitrogen in your fertilizer to get the benefits of that water. Unfortunately, a lot of times, there are water quality problems with water. And that's where this project is coming into play. And so we are developing sensors that automatically detect nutrients in the water, nitrate, phosphate, ammonium, temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, and turbidity. The exciting thing really here is the nutrients, because generally speaking, to get at the nutrient content of water, you have to do really high intensive laboratory techniques that also involve high frequency sampling, sending a person out into the field, collecting that water, processing that water in the lab. And so the sensor that we're working with does it automatically. And so it's a new sensor, it's new technology, but if it works, it could be a really, really great way to monitor water quality more regularly. And I also want to point out that when someone talks about water quality, it's good to think about what they're actually talking about. Right, so when I talk about water quality, I generally mean nutrients in the water. If it's a fish biologist, they might actually be talking about the temperature of that water, right? Is it too hot for the fish that live in there? If you're talking to a farmer, it could be salinity in that water, right? How many salts are being introduced into that field because of that water? It could also be associated with toxins in that water that are produced by harmful cyanobacteria. So distinguishing that point is also pretty important. So here is our schematic in Scottsbluff. We're putting these sensors in the Tri-Cities area. This map was also drawn by Ani, and you've seen lots of different iterations of them today, which has been pretty cool. So we're looking at 3 of the tributaries that are coming into the Platte River, putting one of these sensors in each of those locations. Those tributaries represent land that's primarily going through the town, so getting an urban signal, land that's going through mostly the irrigated row crops, and then another tributary that's a mix of both row crop and CAFOs, the confined animal feedlots. So we can get signals of different land use types, and with this concurrent data generation, we can start to understand how different changes in land use practices might be affecting the water quality, and develop really good baseline information about what's happening in this region. And the hope, of course, right, is that if these sensors work, we can use them in more places and use them to develop more information about water quality in Scottsbluff and beyond. So here's myself and Steve Thomas. As John mentioned earlier, we had just crazy supply chain issues that led to delays in this project, and we are so happy in this picture because we finally have the sensors. They're in Lincoln. They're getting in a truck on Wednesday and driving out here. Will probably be up by the end of the week. So we're super, super excited. The other really cool thing about this project, right, is that we're working with the computer science students at UNL, and we're developing a web-based portal so that anyone can access this information on hopefully just a couple-hour delay. So the website will be streamnet.unl.edu. It's live already, but it's not real data, of course, because the sensors haven't gotten out there. But super excited about this project and super excited to talk more with folks about it. Pass it on to the next person.
So Shin will be our next presenter. Again, if you have questions, if you want to text them to this number, we'll go ahead and add them to the list.
Thank you. My name is Shin, and
Oh, dang it, it's Sujesh. I'm sorry.
all right, now my turn.
Good afternoon. My name is Vijesh Maharajit. So my attempt here is to just do a kind of overview at the same time, showcase some of my novel approach or focus with respect to nutrient management. So nutrient stewardship, focusing productivity as well as the environmental sustainability. You might have seen the first corner on the top, the picture of nutrient stewardship. Only if we could know the right source, right amount, right timing, right placement of nutrients, right? So most of the fertility program is revolving around these four things. What would be the best source of fertilizer, how to apply, when to apply, where to apply. And among those four, probably I could have done a survey, but I would argue that probably the rate is the most important. Unless we learn to efficiently manage nutrients, which would then require less amount than what we put today, whatever else we do, assuming that the crop uptake will stay constant, whatever else we do without cutting down on the input wouldn't be that consequential. So, and then below here, I have a schematic workflow, how the fertilizer behaves in the soil, be it urea-based or ammonia-based, nitrogen. It goes through certain transformation. Ammonium and the nitrate form is what we are interested in, but in between, there are many pathways via which this nitrogen can be lost to the environment. And when we talk about the sources, there are a couple of sources that's out in the market. I know many NRDs probably already cost-share with farmers for the use of some of these advanced technologies. First one is the coated fertilizer. It's a pretty simple physical inhibition from fertilizer release to the soil as a function of soil moisture and temperature. Fertilizer will slowly be released to the soil, thereby ensuring the sustained presence of the nitrogen in the soil for the crop to uptake. And second technology is chemical inhibitors. So this is a chemical mechanism which slows down the process of breaking down of urea or oxidation of ammonium to nitrate. So again, we are just slowing the process of nitrogen transformation, thereby, all the nitrogen we apply doesn't rush into the nitrate form and then, like this lake, how water will just take it down the soil profile to the water, groundwater. So these are two technologies that's available in the market. We do a lot of investigation involving these products. And when it comes to nutrient management, of course, the backbone is the soil sampling. Farmers do have to acknowledge and account for what's there in the soil before they decide to add any more inputs. We do have field trials going on where we insert these tubes with the suction cup at the end, which allows us to collect the water below the root zones and then analyze it for nitrate. We also do some crop sensing, and all these tools are there to monitor the leaching as well as also to help us optimize the nutrient management. So getting down to some of the work that we have been doing, one thing to note is that here in the Panhandle, the crops we grow, most of the crop harvest goes to the human consumption right away, right? Unlike corn, soybean, not via cattle feed. And since most of our crop here are harvested for human consumption directly, we have one extra edge here that we can really work with, and that is the quality of the produce itself. Not that quality of the corn grain is not important, but quality of the crops that we harvest here gain attention right away. For example, sugar beet. All these years, the UNL recommendation has been the nitrogen for the crop yield. And this is how the general response curve we generate. We have crop yield in the y-axis, different rates of nitrogen on the x-axis, and with the response, we try to find out what is the optimum nitrogen rate. And on this curve, this is the real data from our last year field trial. At about 125 pounds of nitrogen, you get 28 tonnage of sugar beet yield. And this has been this algorithm. This has been the way people have been using the nitrogen versus sugar beet. But last year we also got the sugar extracted sugar response to this nitrogen rate, meaning it's not the sugar beetroot itself, it's the sugar that we extract from it. It's the valuable value from the crop. And when we consider for the sugar itself, what we really need is only about 80 tons of nitrogen. So this can be a pretty game-changing here in sugar beet if this data stays consistent this year and next year or further, and we can recommend farmers to add fertilizer, not targeting for the root itself, but for the sugar content in it, then that can save a lot in the input, with of course benefits with regard to the environment. And why this is happening is because sugar is a function of not only the root itself, but also the sugar content in it, the loss of sugar to molasses during the extractions, the tear dirt farmers bring to the factory when they bring the root. So all these factors account into the sugar extraction. And in the same field trial, we also have those lysimeters where we could collect the water at the below the root zone and look at the leaching by different nitrogen rates. And this is just to showcase that something obvious, which is less you put, less would be leached to the groundwater. So with that, this is the last slide to just showcase that one of our focus here in our nutrient management is not only the crop production, but the quality of the crop that we produce. Sugar in the sugar beet, protein in the dry beans and field peas, yieldable, marketable potato. So this quality aspect probably is one important factor that might help us to optimize nutrient management, not only for production, but also for environment. Some other ideas I suggested here, nowadays a lot of carbon credit is out there, so accounting for those things might also be very important as we manage our nitrogen for water quality. And the last figure I have is about the planetary boundaries some scientists have come up with just to ensure that we are operating in a safe planetary boundaries, because once we transgress any of these boundaries, we get into a very unknown territory. Things can abruptly change. We don't have data to even know what will happen if we cross those boundaries. For example, climate change. Once you reach a certain level of CO2 or radioactive forces, we get into a territory, things can very abruptly change in ecology. And if you look at the nitrogen cycle, we have gone way beyond the planetary safe boundaries, gone through the roof. It's a lot of reactive nitrogen in the environment, and definitely this is a big issue, and really glad to be here and be able to discuss with you, and look forward to your questions.
So I'm going to put up the phone number there. Again, if you have questions, you can text them to that number.
I was going to advance the slides myself to just make sure. So, my name is Xin Qiao, and today I got a plan for you. So what I'm going to present is a Panhandle Learning Agricultural Network we've been working on since 2019. And 2020 really slowed us down, but this year we are picking up the momentum again. So the idea that spurs the development of plan was because of tunnel collapse in 2019. Many speakers talk about that this morning. The impact was pretty bad, and for an irrigation engineer and a scientist, we were wondering about what was the actual yield impacts for those fields in 2019. So we did collected some survey from 42 fields in that year. This is the data we got. So we know the harvested yield, we know when the tunnel collapse happened, we know when they plant the crop. That's it. There are some yield, some were higher, some were lower, but what was happening, what was causing that? Some field might be more resilient, some maybe not, but why? We don't know. And there, for a research station, it is pretty hard to simulate or replicate those factors into our tiny research plots. So we wanted to go out and we wanted to do some on-farm network, but in a different approach. So we have this framework. The idea is for those fields, we would like to have data. The data will be some numerical data, like the sensors, all the high-tech stuff, but there are some other data, like tillage, the soil type, the crop variety. It also could be observation. Maybe the grower go out, he saw that, well, today the field was not looking good. That is actually also a data point. We wanted to capture all that, go into processing, and make that into a decision making tool. And it should be a closed loop. It should constantly having the user feedback because there are so many factors. So we can keep adjusting the framework, keep adjusting the algorithm, make that relevant to the region. So there's a lot of text, but it basically that's a more detailed explanation of previous slide. There are some sensors. These are the sensors we've been working on so far, and this one gray out here, this is being testing right now. And we have an in-house developed reporting website, so it's highly customizable. Everything on the website we develop there that's our own. And we have continuous interaction with all the growers in the network. So this is how ideally, if we get a lot of funding, and we're trying to apply to different funding resources, ideally, a field should look like this. So there will be what we call AI flow cam that capture the flow meter readings. There should be a canopy cam capture the canopy size of the field. And there should be some moisture sensors capturing the soil water response from the field. And there's also an infrared radiometry thermometer to capture the plant response from the field. So many of these technologies, we have developed that, and if you stay on for the water tour tomorrow, you will see the prototype of the AI flow cam and also the canopy cam. But this is how we imagine it will look like if we get big funding. So since 2020, we had 6 fields participated in the network. We cover about a little bit over 1,000 acres. And that was during COVID. It was really hard to go out there, install the sensors. And this year we increased a lot. We have 23 fields and we cover much more area. And the interesting thing is actually the size of the field or the grower we're working with. So this is a histogram of distribution of all the fields we are working with this year. On the horizontal axis, these are the size of the individual field. On the y-axis, that's how many fields we have for that size. So you can see we have some pretty smaller fields ranging from 13 acres to 67 acres. We also have only one field. That one single field is over 300 acres. So pretty interesting, so we can capture different management practices and different angle when it comes to farming. We talk about the interactive learning process. Many speakers talk about technology so far, but one thing I personally feel like is necessary is if you give a soil moisture graph, which this thing is, to a grower, probably he will need help. But where he can get the help, he can call you, he can come to your office to talk about it. But we want a more interactive process. So this is a website we have. This is from one grower from an alfalfa field. So these lines, these are soil moisture content from different root depth. This is from 8 inches. So if the line goes up, it's dry. If it's at this level, it's bone dry. And if there's a dip, that means there was an irrigation or there was a rainfall. So this was during alfalfa cutting. You might see some blue square over here. So that's a part where they can click on that data point, and there will be a comment box pops up, and he can input his observation for that data point, and it will be archived and saved for that field. And we can also go in there to comment back what we think. So eventually we have a history of all the comments for that individual field. It cannot replace the phone call, the office visit or field day, but it gives us another angle that we can constantly interact with the farmer and providing help. I'm clearly over the 5-slide limit, but I put this slide here, just wanted to show you how beautiful Western Nebraska is, how good to be able to work here. So you can probably see the smile when they install the soil moisture sensors, and actually it's sitting in the back. But that's all I have, and these are some sponsors and collaborators, and thanks again for having me here.
I'm impressed. Over 5 slides, but under 5 minutes. Good job, Shin. So Carlos, you're up.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about drought-tolerant beans. When I joined for this position, I mean, it was about 16 years ago, I visited with the Nebraska Diving Commission, and they asked me why I was digging for drought tolerance, because the beans are, you learn today that they are 100% irrigated. But I was thinking at that time, in the future, that we're going to be facing some, drought stresses. The first thing is to, in the breeding process, it was to identify the sources of drought resistance. This is adapted for Western Nebraska. Integrate those sources of drought resistance into elite Nebraska germplasm. We are number 1 in grain oilseed production in the United States, number 2 in pintos and large kidney beans. And then understand what are the mechanisms of that resistance and map the drought-resistant beans, and eventually develop some market that we can use for market assistance selection. These are the main sources of germplasm tested in Nebraska since 2006, and have been tested under normal, irrigated conditions and drought stress. And drought stress, we stopped the irrigation of flowering. This year, we are, it's pretty much rain-fed condition. We haven't irrigated beans, and since we installed the climatological station, we have been getting only less than 2 inches of total precipitation. Looking some Middle America and Andean diversity panels. Like SEAT has a collection of 37,000 different kind of beans. I have been able to bring some of those beans to Nebraska. And developing lines that are coming from the ongoing shuttle breeding between Nebraska and Puerto Rico. We have been selecting here for the beans in Nebraska, wherever is selected on the drought stress, and wherever is selected here, send it to Puerto Rico, and we are sending back and forth. This is 2000. In this year, we have these are the different experiments. We have regarding the shuttle breeding between Puerto Rico and Nebraska. We're in the third cycle process, and we have been able to release 2 black beans, 1 pinto, and a small red bean that has drought tolerance, heat tolerance, and multiple disease resistance. Conducting an epigenetics study with the University of Delaware, we are growing the same germplasm. We're growing in the same at both locations, and I'm collecting beans for RNA analysis. And I am the dry bean drought nursery coordinator. I mean, we are testing beans from, and our beans have been tested in Washington, Colorado, Michigan, of course here in Nebraska, and this is a multi-state effort, and this is part of our regional activities. Being able to release this cultivar is called Hikakiti, and it has been released in Tanzania. It's a pinto bean that has a drought tolerance. And I hope that you had the opportunity to visit with Santos Barrera. He's my PhD student, and we are working on developing beans with heat tolerance. And this is coming from Phaseolus acutifolius. It's a different species, but there is when we made the process, we had to do embryo rescue, but Santos was able to identify a couple lines that are able to cross between both species without any embryo rescue. It's called the bridging parental lines. And these are some of the parameters that have been taken. Days to flowering, days to maturity. I'm looking for soil moisture content at 9, 18, and 30 inches deep. Leaf temperature, stomatal conductance, yield 100% weight, and leaf tissue for RNA and DNA analysis. In previous studies, we were able to identify in chromosome 1 and 2 the resistance for drought tolerance, and over here we are looking how much water is here we are comparing to experimental line. These are on the drought stress, and some of the beans, some of the lines that start depleting the water at the surface level really quick compared to other lines. And for example, this line over here is depleted water, but doesn't take any water at 18 and 30 inches. Of course, there is no difference among non-stress plots. That's it. Do you have any questions? Or feel free to send it to.
All right. So I have lots of time. The last speaker and Jessica, for your information, clock stop. So you cannot blame me. Okay? Aha! Jeez. Okay. I'm an alternative crops breeding specialist here. Non-traditional crop, new crop. So I do not work on corn, do not work on dry bean, not sugar beet, not wheat. So I have no place here. I'm jobless. Okay? I work on something new crops, non-traditional crop, which you might not have seen last night or like yesterday you were coming. Here is my plate. It's a pretty crowded plate. It's a feast, okay? If you see, there are 3 major groups of crops I work on. Cereals, ancient grains like millet. I can include other millets as well, but proso millet is my main crop, which is a cereal. Oilseed crop, sunflower, canola. Noble protein source, environmental sustainable high quality protein source, plant-based, And another group, possibly 4 groups, is miscellaneous crop, meat, industrial hemp, buckwheat, black eyed pea, again, plant protein crop. So these are the crops. Why people here, why University of Nebraska hired me to develop this kind of minor, so-called orphan crop. Here is the traditional cropping system, okay? My focus is dryland. Again, I have no place. This, we have been talking about water, we have been talking about nitrogen leaching, which is mainly focused on the irrigated farming system. My focus is dryland. Here is the traditional cropping system. They plant wheat in mid-September, it goes to dormancy, harvest in first week of July, then they leave the field fallow for 14 months. So, one wheat in 2 years. What is the cropping intensity? 50%. During that fallow year, you leave land open. What it causes? It causes soil erosion, nutrient erosion, 1930 dust bowl, because you are plowing the land, leaving empty like that. So my job is to develop some new crops to fill up this kind of thing so that we can increase cropping intensity from 50% to maybe 60, maybe 75, maybe not 100%, because I may not be able to do continuous cropping in a dryland situation or limited irrigation system. Obvious reason, because our precipitation is low, our ET is high, my crop will not be supported from the soil moisture. That's the reason I have to develop new crop. Okay, what is the situation? This is an example of safety. Okay, this is the ET demand on an average, and this is the x-axis is January to December, and this is the precipitation. Our area is a summer precip zone. Most of the precipitation comes in the summertime. But during the summertime, look at the ET. Who will fill up this gap? Under irrigation condition, like if you have irrigation, of course you fill up some of those things, but under dryland or when water is limited, there is no chance. So you need to find some crop, probably which can balance throughout that year. Try to develop some crop or identify some crop which you can put where the ET demand is low, and some crop obviously you have to grow in the summer. So these are the different crops for this area. What I'm going to give you a point highlight here, probably 3 crops. One is yellow field pea, which is a cool season pulse crop. You can plant early as mid-March to 10th April. What is the ET that time? ET demand is pretty low. So I am planting pea there. My major water requirement is happening during this time where soil has plenty of soil moisture. And then I harvest spring pea in mid-July. Versus when you are planting corn, say under dryland or irrigated, you are planting in the June. ET is pretty high, and you are harvesting in November. So that's why for corn, water requirement is high because we lose quite a bit of water. Another crop, for example, I work on sunflower and millet. Of course, that is summer crop I plant here and harvest millet here in the middle of September. Of course, sunflower in the end of November. Another crop, winter pea, which can be planted at the same time like mid-September. It stays dormant. What is the ET demand? Not that much. Then it goes to dormant, and then I harvest in first week of, again around mid-July I harvest. So the bottom line, I have to design the crop so that I can incorporate a different time of the year in order to maximum utilize the soil moisture available from the winter, early spring, and try to avoid high ET demand period. That's the way I have to develop the crops. So when I told I have no place because I do not work on dry bean, sugar beet, corn or wheat, what is the place? Morning we heard John Birch talked about alternative cropping. He was talking about sunflower. Before that, Jay was talking panhandle without sugar beet. What would happen to the socio-economic condition? Maybe there is some crop, although my focus is dryland, but all these crops are low water requiring crop. For example, this is a picture what was taken by my co-worker here, Gary Stoll, who is sitting behind. In Sion County, they are about a mile apart, 2 feet. This is proso millet and this is corn. This is not harvestable. I get some decent yield. But the farmers still grow corn. Why? Because of the policy, because the crop insurance. If corn is failed, they can collect that insurance money. That is a different story. But with respect to their environmental sustainability, in the drought year, I still can get some grain. The top graph shows the amount of grain produced per 1 gallon of water. This x-axis is the crop, y-axis is the volume of the grain. Wheat, barley, corn, sorghum, foxtail millet, proso millet. With 1 gallon of water, proso millet can give highest amount of grain. So among these major crops, proso millet has the highest water use efficient crop. So in a drought year, if my water allocation is 12 inch or 11 inch or 10 inch, maybe I need to put half of the circle with corn, millet, and half of the circle with corn. Because the water I save from the millet, I can use for corn. Those are the places for this audience. The different question is market. Where is the market for proso millet? Is it profitable? That comes secondary. I'm a breeder. My job is to develop and identify those kinds of crop where there is a place here, where there is a dry land or irrigated situation. Field pea. As I mentioned, it can be planted in early spring, where the soil has lots of moisture from the winter. It doesn't, and it harvests before the peak of the summer. It doesn't take that much water, and it's a natural fertilizer. So it doesn't need external nitrogen fertilizer as the ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, or urea. On top of that, it is adding some nitrogen to the soil from the air, which has almost 78% of total air is nitrogen. So gaseous nitrogen converted to nitrate for the following crop, whether wheat or corn. So it's kind of double-edged sword. It doesn't need any external nitrogen fertilizer, and it adds some organic fertilizer. So my last slide. What is the significance of this? Environmental resiliences, okay? As I told, low water requirement, low nitrogen requirement, millet and other crops. Rather, it provides some nitrogen credit, scavengers of residual nitrogen. If I'm following corn or some other high nitrogen requiring crop, this kind of crops take some nitrogen. These are healthy to human. Is a healthy carb. For example, millet is a gluten-free. Lots of other nutrients are there. Healthy protein, as I said, is a low water requiring good quality plant protein. For example, 1 pound of lentil, it takes 47 gallons of water, whereas 1 pound of beef, it takes 1,857 gallons of water. Well, we love steaks. Can I maybe replace or substitute once a week steaks if we care about the water, if we care about our grandchildren, if we care about natural resources? Question is, that answer lies in you. So what is the model we are talking about, this minor crop? I was talking this morning, I was just commenting, maybe we need to develop a complementary, this kind of crop-based industry in this area in order to mitigate the situation where water really goes down, sugar beet industry is the verge of losing or driving processing industries. Maybe something like farm to farmer in this area. All the crops I work on are related to high quality human health. Can we use those kinds of food crops to develop some high value food product with a documented health benefit? Can we develop that industry here? It will not happen in 5 years, may not happen in 10 years, may happen in 50 years if you are challenged to do that kind of things. And my colleague Vijay Mohanjan talked about that nitrogen and quality. I have been working with him for pea, millet, sunflower, the nitrogen requirement. You can argue, you are talking about dry land production system where the nitrogen leaching is coming. But there is no difference of water coming from irrigated land versus water coming from dry land. If I put lots of nitrogen on microscope millet field on the dryland farm, and maybe 25% of the nitrogen is used by the plant, remaining nitrogen is lying there. Where it is going? Either it is going to air as a nitrous oxide, greenhouse gas, or it is sitting there in the winter when the water comes, in the spring when the snow is melting, nitrogen is going to the groundwater, it is mixing everywhere. So we are trying to optimize the nitrogen requirement so that expense cost is lower, reduced, as well as environmental stress goes down. So with that, I'll stop here, and then we'll sit here and wait for your question. Thank you.
Again, you're welcome to text questions into us. We have a few in the queue, but again, the phone number is up on the screen. So the first question, I think is open to anyone. Are there any existing collaborations between the Panhandle Center and Western Nebraska Community College students and faculty, and what can be done to advance this partnership? So those of you with student collaborations, do you want to address maybe more broadly how you recruit students and what they do within your program? Go ahead, Shin.
So every summer we do get, it's really loud, sorry. Every summer we do get some interns from WNCC, and Jeff is not here. And Jeff is also working not only with the community college students, but he's also working with the Gary High School students to develop some sensors for capturing the bugs and those kind of things. And sometimes we get invited to WNCC to present the work or to kind of show them what the research is all about of different areas. I think, Jessica, you also organize the Career Ed Day every year, so she can talk more about that. And I think over the past years, there has been grants that the community college and the Panhandle Center worked on together, trying to provide funds to college students from a 2-year college, transfer that to a 4-year college, and provide assistance and guidance during that process. So.
Just making a quick comment about that one. I think many of us, we have hosted, but recently there has been some strategic planning to move forward, not only undergraduate students from Western Nebraska Community College, but also have a partnership with the local high school. Why it is important? Sooner we create interest in those young kids' mind about agriculture, about food production, fibers production, whatever we do, and how it is connected to their life, their family, water, nitrogen, price, all these things better for them, because they are the future leader. From INR, there is a new position here. Who will be here? She or he will be working as a liaison between UNL and the local high school system to bring high school seniors or even juniors to us here in the different model that has to be worked out, but the plan is there strategically to bring younger high school students here so that eventually they get interested in any field of the food production system. Food is becoming important. Otherwise, Google would not have invested millions of dollars on sequencing some of the crops, or IBM would not have invested millions of dollars investing on genomic sequence of different crops. So whether it's a computer technology, chemical engineer, physical science, doesn't matter. Everything is coming kind of interconnected interface. So we have a strategic plan in place to reach out to those young kids.
So just a little bit about our Career in Agriculture Day. Every year we partner with the Scottsbluff Area Chamber of Commerce, and we bring area high schools. This year we're bringing 6 area high school FFA chapters here to the Panhandle Center, as well as regional businesses to discuss career and internship opportunities specifically in agriculture. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for students to learn about science and what we do here from an agricultural perspective. Okay, let's go back to a question. Let me find a good one here. Have any of you tried the practices that you have recommended and as a part of the UNL TAPS contest? If not, do you plan to do so? So Shin, have you guys integrated any of your work into UNL TAPS? I think you'd be the most applicable.
I have not. So my past few years, just so you know, we have a lot of very successful irrigation faculties in the system. So be at the Panhandle and try to different with the rest of the guys. The first two crops I put most of my energies on are dry beans and sugar beets. So I think taps right now, mostly it's on corn or sorghum, maybe. So if they expand to the Panhandle area in the future and involve dry beans and sugar beets, I'll definitely want to give it a try. But right now, I have not.
Besides 4 of us here at the table, there are 7 more faculties in the center. So Dr. Cody Creech is a dryland specialist, so he started already. I think this was his second year TAPS program with winter wheat production. So and it's organized in Sydney High Plains Ag Labs. There is one program going on in collaboration with the TAPS.
All right, thank you for that. This next question actually is for you, Bajesh. Are farmers currently paid on beet tonnage of sugar, are farmers currently paid on beet tonnage or concentration of sugar? Will the nitrogen data you presented increase income or only decrease cost savings?
So we learned yesterday in the morning that farmers are only paid per tonnage of sugar, not the sugar beet.
Will the information you provide increase their income or just decrease their costs?
Of course, when we decrease the cost, I think income will go up, right? That's kind of counterintuitive, that I can earn by saving on the input. So either way, either you raise more crop or you save on the input, I think the net income will go up, right? So this is one of those situations where everybody all can agree. By putting less fertilizer, you won't compromise with your yield at all. You will still get 5 tons of sugar from your every acre as you were doing with 130 pounds of nitrogen, right? So by cutting down on nitrogen, you still get the same sugar. You get paid for the same amount, but you save on the input. So yes, you save on input, your income will also go up.
All right, the next question is for Carlos. How does shuttle breeding work? So can you explain the shuttle breeding program, please?
It seems I have been. I do have the winter nurseries. I mean, I cannot grow beans here during winter time. I just send my beans to be grown in Puerto Rico, and I have a cooperator from the USDA, Dr. Tim Porch. We visit each other and say why not to because the beans that I've been sending for my winter nursery, they perform really well down there, and vice versa. The beans that I've been getting from Puerto Rico perform really well here in Nebraska. And then we start Dr. Porsche, and he's the person that is in charge of introducing like the tropical germplasm into American germplasm or temperate germplasm. We said, why not to start working at both locations. I mean, he started making the crosses that is part of his mandate. And then he sent me the, like segregant population, for example, in F2 or F3 generations. Over here I grow the beans on the stress, drought stress. And it's exposed to not only drought stress, but also to whatever disease is present here in this location. And I do select, and we select, he comes here to Nebraska, and we do the selection together, and whatever is selected here is sent back to Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico is grown under drought, heat tolerance, and other diseases. I mean, in 1 year we can make up to 2 generations. And then, based the results of this program is the release of these, 4 lines that can be used as, sources of not only drought but heat tolerance plus other diseases that are common in Puerto Rico and in Nebraska.
Thank you for that. So the next question is for Deepak. Is it correct that part of the reason for the fallow system is to save water for the next year's crop? If intercropping is used, what does that mean for the next wheat crop? Does yield decrease? So if we go to a more intensive cropping system, what are the implications?
In general, yes. If you try to reduce the fallow, it will reduce the wheat yield potential next time when you are growing. In general, that is true. But if your farm, if you are lucky that you get maybe a couple of inches of water after planting in September, then you may be okay. Or if you are talking about that profit margin, if that year when you are growing, if the wheat price is 50 cents higher, then maybe if you are losing 5% or 10% yield, maybe your profit is not reduced proportionately. So it depends on situation. But in general, fallow has been placed because if you continue a crop, as you are doing that, we do not have enough soil moisture to support the emergence of the wheat. That's the reason you need to recharge the soil and with the moisture. But the problem happens, like it's just all the moisture because of the eating, it just goes. But with the no-till farming system, leaving the residue, moisture conservation, probably it is better. But in our experience, we have seen, even if you put as a cover crop yellow field pea, we are trying to plow it down in first week of June. We see reduction in wheat in the following crop. That happens. Nothing is free. There is no free lunch. If you want to grow some plant biomass, you need to put water. It takes water. There is no magic that you get biomass with less water or no water. There is no magic.
I have a couple more for you while you're up. Is the field pea hardy enough to withstand late spring snow and freezes?
Yes, that is the frost tolerant. I can plant, if I can take my drill to the field in first week of March, I would love to plant, but I never could. That's why the winter pea, which is one crop, I just got excited. The last fall I planted is well-treated crop, because that kind of uncertainty, late spring rainfall or uncertain weather, like this year for example, but after 10th April I cannot plant pea. I'm taking too much of risk. Alliance, I planted field pea on 30th of April. Guess what is my yield? Single digit yield. Normally I get about 35, 40, 45 bushel pea at Alliance, but this year because of the late planting. So yes, pea is the frost tolerant.
Where else is millet grown in the U.S. and specifically where is it grown internationally?
Millet, we call proso millet as a millet. Millet is a group of crops. There are 7 cultivated millets. Proso millet is one of them. Palm millet, finger millet, foxtail millet, proso millet, kodo millet, barnyard millet. These are the millet globally it is produced. In US, for the grain, it is the proso millet is number 1. It's probably the major one only one maybe. 3 states, Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota produces 95% of US millet. Colorado grows about 50 to 55% total millet, Nebraska about 25%, South Dakota about 20%. Remaining 5% comes little bit from North Dakota, little bit from Western Kansas, little bit from Wyoming, maybe little bit of Minnesota here and there, but majority is from these 3 states. Internationally, probably US is the number 1 for proso millet, but for palm millet, which is the 50% of the total millet production globally, it is India is the number 1. Finger millet, India is number 1, Africa is number 2, and for proso millet, China is number 2. We are the highest producer, then China is the second highest producer for proso millet. So make sure millet is a general term. A similar crop which are drought tolerant, C4 photosynthetic crop is a small grain, not very tasty if you try to eat like paddy, and really drought tolerant. Those are the general features. And taxonomically, it belongs to panicoid group like milo, corn, and yes, those are the crops, sugarcane, the same group. So it's those groups called millet, and those are the 7 cultivated millet which are used primarily for food globally, whereas in the US it is primarily for bird feed.
Could these alternative crops be used as cover crops?
Yes, millet is being used as one of these cover crop mixture, because millet seed is small, and with all other cover crops where the seed size is very similar, that is one of the challenge. Millet is being used in eastern side. I know there has been work in Wisconsin, Missouri, and eastern Kansas. Yes, particularly when you are talking about no free lunch, millet probably one of the good things. It doesn't take that much of water. Still, it does at least most of the cover crops require.
All right, my next question is for Jessica. Where are your sensors made and what are their lifespans?
So the sensors, the nutrient sensors are made by a company called Green Eyes. The sensors themselves are called Blue Labs, and they're made in Easton, Maryland, which is on the eastern shore. They, for the person that's asking this for a little bit of reference, Ohio has a bunch of these sensors out there because of the Toledo water crisis, and really trying to understand nutrient runoff from the agricultural fields there. The lifespan of the sensor themselves, the reagents need to be replaced about every month or so. And then in terms of just general maintenance, it's sort of just, like any technology, the better you take care of it, the longer it will last. The reagents inside are the things that are really time sensitive, but I don't see why if they don't get shot with a shotgun or heat up too much in the middle of summer, they wouldn't have years and years of solid data coming out of them. There is a second sensor inside of these sensors called an exome, which is made by YSI, or Yellow Springs Instruments. That's where the pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen conductivity comes in. And those sensors, so YSI is one of many different companies that makes that type of sensor. A couple other brands include, I'm totally going to blank on the multi-parameter sondes, but multi-parameter sondes are made by a bunch of different companies. We went with YSI because there was software already available to connect it to our new labs, but you can replace it with a different type of sensor in there. And the way that the instrumentation works is that you can customize it a lot. So if you're in an area particularly interested in a different metric that was also able to be done autonomously, then you can swap that sensor in there, reroute the plumbing, and have it go at it. And the second part of that question, I think I forgot already.
So did I. What are their lifespans?
Oh, yeah, I got that. Okay.
Okay. So my next question for you is, how cost efficient is high resolution stream water monitoring? So we'll start with that one.
That's a great question. And the cost efficiency comes a lot from
the calculation that accessibility of your site and how actually high frequently you want those data. So the sensor, the new lab sensors run about $35,000. So that's fairly expensive. But to also pay someone or multiple people to go out and collect samples every 2 hours and run those samples in the lab, that's going to be probably more than the salary and benefits of that individual. So there is a calculus to it. I think in places that people are know their system well, know how often they need to go out and collect samples to get that information, then these aren't necessarily the right thing. But if you live in a system where things are changing, you don't know when you need to sample to see those changes, having an autonomous sensor in there can be really helpful in characterizing your system.
So how does one maximize the use of expensive sensors and manual sampling across many stream systems? Do you feel like you got that?
Yeah, that is another great question. And we're, so Ani's work right now, she's going out to a bunch of sites around Scotts Bluff to characterize with more spatial intensity than we can get with our free sensors. And so we can look at her data spatially, combine it with our temporal data to understand, what are we learning with free sensors? What are we missing with free sensors? What's the optimum amount of sensors that one would need? And some of these questions, all of these questions are related to the management or research question that a person has in mind. So if that question is, are the cropping systems effectively reducing erosion and leaching from our streams? That's going to need sort of a different schema for sampling than if the question is, what's the total amount of nitrogen and phosphorus leaving the Platte River every year? So doing a combined approach, if you have the resources, is a great way to develop a scheme, and then iteratively changing it, right? Not being locked into a single sampling scheme if one's priorities change is also really important.
Okay, last one from this setup. As nutrient yields in streams are highest during high magnitude hydrological events, how are the sensors employed effectively across different land use classes?
So this is a really good reason to have sensors. So high yield, high flow events are very dangerous to send people out to sample. There are sampling schemes that you can do to mitigate that, and in our case, our sensors are not stored in the stream itself. We have plumbing that plumbs water from the stream up to the sensor housing where those samples get run. So that way, we can actually sample high flow events without worrying about our sensors being transported downstream like a giant tree lug or something. So that can be super effective. We're also looking simultaneously at, so we have the nutrients on there, but then we also have more simple metrics like conductivity. And if we can find relations in the valley where conductivity is a great proxy for something else, that can also help minimize costs. Those kinds of things really do need to be context dependent. And so if it works in, if it works in Easton, Maryland on their streams there, it doesn't necessarily work here because the chemical makeup of our systems are different.
And last one, how will StreamNet help local municipalities understand and plan for drinking water resources?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so we've been in conversation with the North Platte NRD, with the towns of Geary and Scottsbluff and Terrytown to develop these sensors in a way that it provides relevant information to them. Drinking water municipalities often have certain regulatory requirements to make sure that the drinking water meets the standards that it does. The hope is that these sensors can help supplement those activities. It maybe lead to warning bells that say, oh, it looks like nitrate is creeping up, that's a problem. Or it looks like our nutrient loads are getting high, and we know when the nutrient loads reach this threshold that if you have a surface water storage for your drinking water, that could be really problematic for cyanobacterial blooms. And so maybe that's when a decision comes that we need to divert water from that drinking water area or something along those lines. There's a lot of potential for these sort of synergies in research aims as well as drinking water or resource management aims.
All right, our next question is for Bajesh. So Bajesh, is the yield goal the primary basis of the nitrogen algorithm for UNL? If so, do we need to get away from this approach, and what are the alternatives?
That's a very good question, and it feels like a lot of people are asking that questions. Yield goal makes the algorithm very intuitive, right? Farmers would love to see what's the unit rate I'm applying for every bushels or the bushels I'm targeting. For example, the rule of thumb for corn is 1.2 pounds per every bushel. So when farmers are targeting 200 bushels, it's easy for him to think, oh, 1.2 times 200, I need 240 pounds of nitrogen. But doing that, we are not accounting for many of the factors in the soil and the climate. Therefore, at least in the north central area, most of the land-grant universities, they moved away from yield goal, particularly for the corn. Nebraska probably one of those very few who still have, not exactly yield goal, but it does, it does have yield goal for corn. So that can be a big topic for discussion for this crowd actually, primarily for the corn. Though corn is still the #1 crop here in Panhandle, we don't see much research dollars for corn here. We still have projects going on corn, but this is a big topic, particularly for the corn. How can we improve our current algorithm, which is quite robust actually. But then when it comes to other crops like winter wheat doesn't have a yield goal in the current algorithm, and it's pretty robust. One time I compared it against algorithms in South Dakota, Kansas, and we do recommend quite lower nitrogen, which still yields as equivalent to what South Dakota or Kansas would go, meaning our algorithm is very, very efficient. Sugar beet has a yield goal in it, but again, it's in flux, as I showcased how sugar beet algorithm can be improved if we account for the sugar itself. So when we go away from the yield goal, the main factor is lots and lots of data to do the modeling, to do the regression, and come up with the optimal recommendation. That's what we are doing with winter wheat, sugar beet, dry bean, but again, all these crops are just primarily here in the Panhandle, so it takes me alone a lot of years to come up with the data. But good question, should we stay with the yield goal, or should we go with many other factors that we need to account for when we decide on nitrogen input? So I don't have much answer, but this can be a very good question. Across the state, primarily for the corn, since it's the biggest crop for us. So some of the factors that can go into the algorithm, moisture, soil conditions, some economics, can we make it dynamic so that we can keep adjusting it based on the commodity value or the fertilizer prices.
The next question is for Carlos. Estimate how many more cycles with Puerto Rico until your next bean release is ready for use.
This doesn't only apply to the chattel, breeding or applies to my bean breeding program. It's gonna take about 7 years, like when we start making from the beginning, when we start making the process of the hybridization. moving from one plant to another plant. And then it's going to take another, like, in case of the shuttle breeding lines that are ready to be released as a chemoplasm, can be ready in 5-6 years. But in case of a cultivar, if we're going to be releasing a cultivar, I mean, the seed is available to be planted in growers' fields. It's going to take minimum 10 years.
All right, our next question I think will go towards Deepak, but it might also play into Shin and so here it goes. So it's a comment, then a question. We have found that extra recharge occurs from southern tablelands from the wheat and fallow rotation. It is observed through increasing water levels. So dryland crops do matter a great deal to the water table in the Ogallala aquifer there. So if alternative crops take off, there could be a negative impact on groundwater levels. It would be an interesting study to understand how these alternative crops affect groundwater aquifer recharge. Is that a study that would be considered?
That's definitely an interesting thought. I also thought about that. As myself said, there is no free lunch. If you want to grow something green, it takes water and everything is connected. So definitely is an important aspect. However, that's not in my soft directly. I'm not expert. So some of my colleagues see BJ's little bit. They may be interested, but definitely we keep that in mind and see if we can do a team project, because that's why we are here for. Unlike main campus Lincoln, every faculty, they have their own program, and here probably none of us, we can really survive if we just want to work on our own program alone. So that definitely that is an important aspect and we will consider. As of now, I do not have an immediate plan.
We're always open to collaboration. All right, so we're just about out of time, but I do want to ask each panelist a final question, and we have 7 whole minutes to answer it. So total as a group, okay? Got it? All right, so what are you most excited about in your research moving forward? So Deepak, we'll start with you.
Climate resilient, human health resilient food crops. That's my passion, interest, whatever crops I work on, most of the crops, for example, millet is a gluten-free, lowest amount of water it takes, very healthy carbohydrate. Not to mention that it is an ancient grain. So if you believe in ancient grain, if you know why ancient grain is so called healthy in that consumer's market, all this property it has. If you talk about field pea, I just gave the comparison of animal protein versus pea protein. Soybean, it is an allergen, it is GMO. So there are people, sector of people, I am not trying to replace no soybean, no corn, no wheat, no chicken, I am not saying that. But there is a place. If all of us, 7.5 billion people in the world, if we tell that we want to live every single day, we will eat beef steaks and corn, probably the whole ecosystem will collapse. So we have to change our personal habit, and that's why my place is, and that keeps me going. Thank you.
For me, is being able to release, develop and release bean thriving cultivars that can be grown here by the Nebraska bean growers, as well as the bean being grown on a worldwide environment.
Well, I think the most exciting thing for me is this network. It really enables me to learn from the farmers, and also you can really see those data if you are under groundwater irrigated land versus surface water irrigated land. So learning from them, and also maybe themselves, and also learn from each other and be more resilient and also excited to develop more sensors that are applicable to our regional agriculture management practices. That has been very exciting for me.
So I feel like I'm a little bit of the odd one out because I'm an ecologist and an ecosystem ecologist, and sometimes I think of really esoteric questions related to the controls of carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus in ecosystems. But the exciting thing about being here in Nebraska is that we do a lot to change where our nitrogen is, where our phosphorus is, where our carbon is, right? Sometimes it's in biomass, sometimes it's in our waterways, sometimes it's in the atmosphere. And that is so exciting because there's this natural experimental landscape, right? We have farmers that have been farming the same way for years and years and years and will continue to farm the same way for years and years and years. That's a great control group. And then you have farmers that are adopting new practices, and ranchers that are adopting new practices. And that means that you're getting these shifts in the landscape that we can then see. What does that mean for how these elements are flowing across the landscape? And what does it mean for the aquatic systems that are really near and dear to my heart? So how are we keeping the rivers running clean? How do we keep our lakes clean and preserved? And I'm so excited to pursue that avenue here at Nebraska.
Excuse me, I was sitting all the time while answering. I was looking at everything, sorry. This is a pretty exciting time to be a soil scientist. You must have heard a lot about soil health, soil carbon, greenhouse gas from agriculture. So a lot of attention has been drawn to soil, as well deserved. So besides those environmental aspect of my work, stable food production is a big part of soil fertility work. So what really excites me these days is all these years while I was in Lincoln or Minnesota during graduate school years, I only worked on corn. So here also we do have corn, but I think besides corn, everything else we work on has a quality aspect. We sort of feel like, oh, something I really got a new thing that I can factor into my program here, just like sugar beet growers. They are already paid for sugar they grow, not the beet only. Wheat growers, they do get premium for their protein quality. Hoping someday Philippines, dry beans will get paid for the protein, human digestible protein content in that. Of course, we're working on hemp and sunflower for the oil content and quality, all that. So I feel like that I want to at least highlight, and that's in my effort, the quality of the produce we grow here in western Nebraska. And that's something I'm very excited if I can one day factor into our algorithms for nutrient management for our growers. Thank you.
So let's do one more round of applause for all of our panelists.